So we want to convert the electromagnetic radiation into a satellite product that can be then used and analyzed by using models and applied to environmental studies. So here in the middle, let me show you. Let me see if I can have a book. Sorry. Oh, that's all. I was looking for the cursor. Sorry, pointer. Yeah, here's the cursor. Okay, here in the middle we have one of these satellite products, and it shows you basically structural or the three-dimensional structure of a storm cell, maybe a hurricane, and how it's composed, the composition of it, right? And this product was generated by multiple measurements from space, right? And why is this important? Well, if we want to predict the effects of a storm, a large storm, on, maybe in urban areas, on the Earth's surface, we may need this type of information as input in a model. So this is just one example. So how can we actually extract information from these measurements? Again, these satellites are not only taking pictures, they're actually measuring some characteristics of the different components of the Earth, whether it's the atmosphere, biosphere, or the hydrosphere, or the lithosphere. And that's all possible due to an understanding of what radiation or energy leaving the ground, what type of information it carries. And that is possible through multiple experiments. We have, for example, many ground stations that take also readings, whether it's the composition of the atmosphere, or we have also instruments that measure, for example, the soil composition or condition, and also the plants and so on. And with the field work that we do and the measurements we carry out in the field, we try to sort of understand what is how can we interpret the radiation that is being reflected or emitted by the ground surface to space. How can we basically interpret the signal in terms of the nature of the target or the object or the land surface that is emitting this type of radiation, And all this, together with these measurements, in situ measurements with satellite measurements, are ingested into a model, and this model, numerical model, basically recreates the processes that happen between the Earth's surface and the atmosphere. Basically, how energy, in this case electromagnetic energy, gets transmitted, reflected, or basically moves from one place to the other, right? And as you know, this is just this cartoon is very small. One example of how the hydrological system, the hydrological cycle functions. There are many, many components, and energy is the number one driver for these processes to happen. So this was just to explain how we can interpret the signal that the satellite receives in terms of the properties of the land surface or Earth surface. Doesn't have to be the land, could be the ocean. How the Earth surface absorbs energy and reflects or transmit a portion of it. Now the applications are very, there's a variety of applications. There are very different types of ways to apply remote sensing, and they're here summarized in three major groups. So it depends on the user's interest, or the professionals or the researchers um, discipline how they will use basically these measurements. But what I'm trying to convey is the message that it's all starts with observing the Earth's surface from space and capturing an amount of radiation that is being emitted or reflected by ground surface. Now, it doesn't have to be the ground, it could be also the atmosphere. And this is where, for example, those who are interested in monitoring air quality would probably look for data. No, they are looking for data that allows them to analyze, for example, the content, the air content or atmospheric content of dust, or also to locate and measure fires and so on, right? There are other disciplines that are not necessarily interested so much in what's happening in the atmosphere, but the atmosphere has an effect on what's happening on the surface in terms of water resources and floods, right? So there's these different components of the Earth systems are linked, so they cannot really be observed in isolation in order to produce a model that explains the processes that are responsible for precipitation, for flooding, for evapotranspiration, groundwater recharge, soil moisture, and so on. No? And then, of course, there's the other group here, land use and land cover change, and the health of vegetation, right? So that would be a group that is mostly interested in ecology or the biology, basically. Okay, right now I'm trying to. Okay, good. All right. So this brings me to this next broad category, ecosystem services. Basically, we're interested in using these technologies to assess the status of the Earth, right, as a system, or the ecosystems, different types of ecosystems that exist on our planet, and understand also not only how they're changing, but also what are the factors driving these changes, because we realize that they provide a very important service, right, to humans, but also to any living creatures, and in general, they are important to keep the balance that is needed so that these processes function the way that they should. Here I'm summarizing what spatial data, and now I'm not using only the words remotely sensed data, but spatial data, because that includes also GIS layers. So once you observe the Earth from space, you capture an image, you convert that into a thematic map, and then ingest that in a GIS system. You basically are dealing now with maps or spatial data, and yes, so these, if you want, spaceborne or satellite-derived data sets are nowadays a big component of any ecosystem system or ecosystem service analysis and so on. They have the advantage, the Earth observations have the advantage that they cover large areas. They're very, spatially explicit, and it's a rapid technique or method to assess and monitor components making up the ecosystem, very cost effective. And of course, you have a way of collecting information and archiving the information over years, and making that information available also for future generations. And you can access, or through this technology, you can monitor regions that are probably very difficult to access, and carry out some field work. And the other very important contribution of remote sensing is that it provides a way to generate maps and at a global, basically a global scale. These land cover maps are often used as proxies to assess the ecosystem characteristics. So here we have one example of a mangrove area region shown in natural colors. And we are often interested in observing and measuring the changes, but also in extracting more additional information, geophysical variables, for example, elevation, climate variables like precipitation, temperature, the hydrology, water cycle, I already mentioned that, primary productivity of the plants, the vegetation in those ecosystems, and the carbon storage. We're very much interested in measuring and monitoring the carbon storage as related to these land transformation or land cover changes. I'm talking about the destruction of forests, including mangroves and so on, and the impact it has on diminishing the carbon storage, canopy structure, woody biomass. All those sort of characteristics are important to assess the health of the ecosystem. And there are a number of satellite systems. I'm here listing the most popular ones, also because they have been around for quite a long time, or some of them. I mean, Landsat, for example, and MODIS have been around for, well, MODIS for 20 years and Landsat now, with all the different Landsat missions, I'm going to talk a bit more about it in a minute, has been around for 50 years. That's half a century. So we have a record, an archive of imagery that describes, our Earth, the entire Earth, system, basically captured in these Landsat scenes, and that's important data, 50 years of data. Then there are other sensors that are maybe not so well known. Hyperion, this was the first hyperspectral sensor placed in space. And then we have also other sensors that operate in a different spectral region, radar, for example. That would be Sentinel-1 and ALOS Pulsar. So since we're talking about spectral regions, here's a graph that basically illustrates that the solar, radiation, the sun, emits, or basically, it provides radiation in different wavelengths. And we humans can only see visible light, which would be this part of the spectral region. So these are wavelengths here. And this, the y-axis shows actually the how transparent the atmosphere is, and that's shown by the gray area here. So whatever is gray, means that the atmosphere is more or less transparent. And what's white, so these gaps, means that the atmosphere is not transparent in those wavelengths. They basically block this type of radiation. And that's important in remote sensing because you want to construct your instrument in such a way that it captures the light being reflected from the Earth's surface, and it has to be able to travel through the atmosphere. So the atmosphere has to be more or less transparent to let the radiation through. However, if you're interested in monitoring aspects concerning the atmosphere, you may want to have some sensors that measure not the radiation coming from the Earth's surface, but maybe radiation that is somehow, interacts with the atmosphere. So you would select wavelengths that are known to be to be difficult to measure because the atmosphere actually interacts with that type of radiation. Anyway, so Landsat, as I said, was launched almost 50 years ago, and it's a program that consists of many missions, Landsat missions, and they are designed to follow certain criteria so that we can assure that images collected in, let's say, in the 70s can still be compared to images collected nowadays. So the technology, of course, is changing, right, over time, but we are, the space agency that is in charge of Landsat missions makes sure that there's some continuity in the way these instruments capture radiation. No? That means that they have similar spectral bands. Here we have a comparison of Landsat 4, 5, and 7 with respect to Landsat 8, and where they have their spectral bands, in which spectral regions, and there's some coordination here, right? It is a passive sensor, so it means that it can only collect radiation coming from an external source, which would be the sun, or during the night it collects thermal radiation being emitted by the Earth. So the Earth also is a body that emits radiation, but of course in a different spectral region. It's thermal radiation, meaning it's heat, right? Recently, recently, I mean, already 7 years ago, we have access now to a new set of satellites managed by the European Space Agency, Sentinel, the Sentinel series, and this is Sentinel-2, which is the optical sensor. And it is in a way similar to Landsat, but it has, of course, some, characteristics that are different. What they're trying with these newer systems, satellite systems, they're trying to design them in such a way that they can be used and combined with other satellite systems. For example, Sentinel-2 and Landsat, and the Landsat data can be sort of combined or harmonized, if you want. That's actually it's data that is now available to the users, and what the space agencies are trying to do is to sort of make these different images or the characteristics of these images comparable, so that you can use them in a time series analysis, right? Just remember that these images are captured by instruments, and each instrument has its own characteristics, and the data it produces, right, needs to be corrected, needs to be calibrated, needs to be validated before the user can actually use it, right? And so there's an important effort to use multiple instruments, because this will ensure that you can view any part of the world. So this is an example of Brazil, but any part of the world with with shorter intervals. So they really want to reduce the intervals between the one collection of one image and then the next one over the same area as much as possible, right? And also they want to make sure that the information is captured in multiple spectral bands. So we'll talk about the spectral bands now, the importance of spectral bands. By looking at another sensor, it's a hyperspectral sensor, which has many, many spectral bands. And here we are seeing a comparison between Landsat, which has only, I think, 7 bands, 3, 4, 5, 6, sorry, 6 optical bands. And Hyperion, which has between, yes, it has 220 spectral bands. So the big difference between a sensor that captures light in 220 very narrow spectral bands, or Landsat, which captures light in only 6 very broad bands. No? And this is shown by this spectral signature. For those who are not familiar with spectral signature, it's like, you know, it's a very characteristic, it's like an ID or a digital, you know, finger print or something like that, that characterizes different materials. So here we got a strip of, this is Hyperion. It's taking an image along a very narrow swath. You know, the strip is relatively narrow but long. And the different colors here mean different types of landforms. This one happens to be taken over Fuji in Japan. And this is the Fuji mountain, the volcano, you know, covered by snow. Here you have the ocean, here you have the coastal area, then the green is, you know, the hilly area around Fuji, and then you got here some topography and so on. And the different colors means, of course, different soil types, different vegetation and so on, and they have very specific spectral characteristics that can be captured by these instruments, no? And the more spectral bands, the more precise we can actually tell what type of species, plant species or soil type we're looking at. So that's why these spectral bands become so important, right? So basically in remote sensing, the most important aspect is electromagnetic spectrum. That is the one that allows us to detect objects and determine the nature of the objects and also the status. So the moisture content of soil or vegetation, salinity content, even of the ocean waters and all that, that's all derived from electromagnetic radiation. And I mentioned the sun as the primary source that we, well, not we, but the optical sensors use. The passive optical sensors use an external radiation source, energy source, which is the sun, and it's shown here with this curve, how much radiation, the intensity of radiation coming from the sun and arriving more or less on the Earth's surface. And we see that the sun has its peak energy intensity or radiation intensity in the visible light. That's the part where our human visual system is capable of detecting basically that type of radiation. No? But it also radiates other sources, other types of wavelengths. But you know, it's the intensity is less, so it becomes more difficult to measure the returning energy by a satellite, because it's just, there's less energy, you know, shining over the Earth, so less energy gets reflected back to space, right? So it's easier for a sensor to capture visible light, and it's more difficult for a sensor to capture light in those other regions, like, you know, far infrared and micro. But it's, the technology is evolving, and nowadays we're capable of doing it. Maybe not 50 years ago, but now these instruments have become so sophisticated that they can take very accurate readings or observations. You know? So here we have two different types of satellites. One is meant to capture only reflected sunlight. The other one is designed to capture energy actually coming from the Earth, well, indirectly from the sun, because the sun heats the Earth absorbs that type of radiation, and then it emits the radiation again in a different wavelength region, thermal, which is heat, right? And of course, some of the radiation is also coming from the atmosphere, here the clouds, right? So these are the two main sensor types, if you want. And they operate in very specific spectral regions. So there's no satellite that can capture all types of energy, right? So they are very much designed for certain purposes, goals. And this is summarized here. So what's happening is that scientists have been thinking about ways of characterizing components making up the atmosphere and also components making up the Earth's surface, including not only land, but also water. And for each one of these components, whether it's the atmosphere, the Earth's surface, and within the Earth's surface, whether it's the biosphere, the hydrosphere, or cryosphere, snow and ice and so on, very, very, very specific instruments need to be used, right? So again, this just summarizes the different types of radiation captured and collected by these sensors. All right, so what do we do with, now that we talked a lot about radiation and energy and all of that, what do we do with these observations? So these satellites really are measuring how many photons per square area per milliseconds are reaching the sensor coming from the target. So what do we do with that? Well, we want to convert this into information, so into something that we can interpret and use for land resources management, but also for water resource management. So this is just an example here for land resources management. So we want to convert these measurements into land cover maps, right? And there are several, if you want, there are several types or several levels of information we're after. So in some cases, the land cover maps should be global, should include the entire world. In other cases, they should be very localized and very specific. Sometimes we want land cover maps that are used to interpret a single moment in time, a single snapshot in time. Sometimes we want land cover maps that cover a whole period, or basically let us understand how land is transforming through time. So there are many, if you want, goals or users. They come with many applications, and all these maps, land cover maps, they are being derived from these sensors. So you can imagine why we have so many sensors up there, right? To satisfy the needs of the users. The users are very diverse. They have many needs, right? And then, of course, we can do something with these images, not only convert them into land cover maps, but we can also extract very specific targeted information from the land cover maps. No? Vegetation indices is an example, or if we are interested in monitoring wildfires, for example, we want to detect the location of the wildfires, but also the effects of the wildfire, burn severity and all that. For all these applications, we need somehow a way to observe and monitor and assess the health of our ecosystems. No? And that's done with change detection techniques and also classification. The user is nowadays, and that was actually not the case when I was a student, a geology student. We didn't have so many choices, but nowadays the user has an incredible a selection of images to choose from. And what these space agencies are doing, so we basically live now in the big data era. So these sensors and satellites are collecting so much data that now the problem is, how to digest the amount of data, how to make that data usable in as soon as possible, right? So you can imagine that now the focus is on providing the user with the information they need, and we have the capability, we have the processing capability, the computing power to generate many products, and they're listed here as level data products, right? From level 1 and level 4. What that means when you visit one of these satellite image archives, whether it's NASA, USGS, or ESA, the European Space Agency, or any other space agency, they will tell you, okay, this is some data from, let's say, a specific sensor like Landsat, but we have different levels. And the different levels means that the raw image was processed up to a certain level and generates, either geolocated, calibrated data, or some geophysical properties were extracted from the image and are made available to the user. That's level 3. Or the satellite data was already ingested into a model, and the model produced an output that would be level 4. So for the non-expert, the easiest type of satellite-derived information would be level 4, because that's like a map that is ready to be analyzed in a GIS system. For the non-expert, it's much harder to use level 1 or level 2 products, and actually level 0 is not even publicly available. That's for engineers that are interested in signal processing. So they're not necessarily interested in the information that you can obtain from the images, so land cover and so on, but they're interested in understanding how to basically improve the quality of the signal that the satellite is observing. So there are many users. So this is to show you that there are many users. Again, Landsat is such an important mission because it started in the 70s, and there's a continuity here, right? So it's a huge collection of imagery. And now there is there's an important effort going on to go through you can imagine the amount of images and scenes that were collected over the last 50 years. Now there's an important effort to reanalyze, reprocess older images with new algorithms. Algorithms that we have access to nowadays, and to basically make it to extract maybe information from the older satellite data that was not possible 30, 40, or 50 years ago, but now it's becoming possible, and to use all these satellite images for different applications. And again, monitoring time series analysis is a very important goal. So we want to, for example, here observe certain landscapes, right? Very different landscapes here, whether it's coastal areas or mountain areas, or whether it's tropical areas, or maybe in higher latitudes. We want to observe how these landscapes and all the features have evolved over time. So that's why we need to rely on a time series that goes back in time as much as possible, right? And yeah, so we already mentioned that what the sensor produces is sort of a picture like this one here over Panama, which shows you in different colors the landscape. But we really want to extract information out of this picture that we can then use in our GIS analysis. No? So that's done through image classification. Here another way of showing the same thing. We have here Landsat image over in California over a Lake Tahoe. And we converted that into a map with a legend in different categories. And now this map becomes or can be used for carrying out maybe some measurements or statistical measurements related to the different land cover types. But this is not the only way of using these satellite derived products. There's also many other data sets available to the user, freely available. I added here the links. I should probably later, I will put the links in the chat so you can actually look it up. Forested areas are very important due to the fact that they store carbon and have an effect, of course, on regulating the climate, right? And so what's happening here is that I'm just going to put my batteries. Okay, I just connected it to the outlet, my computer. There's an important effort to monitor forested area globally. And one of the products that is available, it's called the Global 30-meter Landsat Tree Canopy product. And as the word says, it's a product that shows tree canopy, not bushes or vegetation, grass. No, its focus is on the forest canopy. They're monitoring that globally, and so basically that means that these images were, many of them had to be stitched together, mosaiced together, and processed in a way that the output shows the tree canopy composition, including the stems, branches, leaves of woody vegetation greater than 5 meters in height. And they're doing that for specific time intervals. So starting with 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2020 probably should be available soon. And they're using the Landsat mission because that's the one that provides the 30-meter pixel resolution. But from 2015 on, we have, in addition to Landsat, we have Sentinel 2. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if they continue this effort using also the Sentinel 2 images. Here you see the scale between 0 and 100. And 100 would be, well, basically a close canopy, close forest canopy, which, you can see, for example, here in the Amazon basin, right? And if you do a comparison over these years, so 5-year time steps, you have a way of assessing how the canopy, the closed canopy structure is changing and being fragmented by human intervention, by basically human intervention. And this is the other website that I wanted to share with you. That's an effort done by researchers in the University of Maryland. Some of you may be already familiar with this. And this is a portal that allows you not only to view and zoom in to these forested areas, but also learn how the forest is being fragmented and the losses. So in red, you see those areas, in this case, it's Brazil again, that have been basically where the trees have been cut, and the forest, has suffered a loss, right? So I also encourage you to visit these websites. They're very interactive. They are based on Google Earth Engine, and they are incredibly informative, no? And this is an example of the use of Landsat images for time series analysis. And again, now there's an effort to combine Landsat with Sentinel 2, which will increment the temporal resolution. Okay, so far I talked about remote sensing and the data products and so on. Unless, I don't know if there are any questions, please let me know. I would like to give you an example from my own research. And so maybe I should continue and then leave some time for questions and answers. Is that okay?
Yes, Prof. You may continue for the presentation. Okay, so after that, we can further.
All right. Okay. So yeah, this is since we are talking about the land cover. This is a project I've been involved for many years actually in Egypt, and as I mentioned, they are really concerned about about agriculture expanding. They want to expand the agriculture activity, but they're concerned about the impacts it may have on natural resources, including not only land but also water. And Egypt is, as you know, is located in a desert environment, and so that means that water resources are very, very scarce, and they have to be very careful in the way they use water. And basically the agriculture activity. Egypt has a long history of agriculture activity for 10,000 years. It's possible mainly due to the river Nile, and so that's the Nile Valley is where you find in Egypt fertile soil, which is needed for agriculture, but also water, right? And also the deltas area and so on, and some parts along the coast. But this Nile Valley and the fertile soil and the water resources and the surface water resources are only making up a fraction of the entire country, right? So basically only, I think, 5 or 6% of the country has direct access to water, surface water, and fertile soil. So 6% is a small fraction, and it's a country with a huge population, and the population is growing, and of course food production is it's of great importance, and then connected to that, water resources. So for the last couple of decades, actually, the Egyptian government has been trying to reclaim desert regions, desert land near the Nile Valley for agriculture. They're basically expanding the agriculture into the desert. But of course, that again requires a number of a number of things, but mainly two major factors. So high quality soil and access to water, because you need to irrigate the crops. It doesn't rain in Egypt, right? So that's where geologists have been sort of contributing in terms of looking at the desert area using space imagery with the different spectral bands. And this is what we call a false color composite image, because it gives you an unusual view of the desert plain area in terms of the color contrast. So if you would fly over Egypt, you wouldn't see these colors. You wouldn't see all these shades of purple and blue and brown and so on, right? By the way, this is a composite map. So you've got the image in the background, and on top of it, you got some GIS layers. So don't get confused with these white and red, patches. So geologists use this type of false color composite to understand the history of the Nile River. The Nile River not only provides water, it is also the source for fertile soil, because whenever there is flooding, some of the silts coming actually from the upland, coming from far away, sometimes these sediments travel huge distances. They come from other countries like Ethiopia, for example. So the water carries sediments from Ethiopia, for example, downstream eventually to Egypt. And that soil contains the minerals needed for agriculture to be possible. And what we see here is I don't know if you see this triangle here. This is the ancient Nile Delta. It's no longer visible on the ground, but these images, multispectral images, they basically make it apparent, visible, because there's a color contrast between the sediments here and the surrounding sediments. The minerals of these sediments are different from the surrounding ones. These are sediments brought by the river, deposited here by the ancient Nile Delta, and still visible when we use wavelength beyond visible light. So with our naked eyes, we wouldn't see these contrasts. So we know that rivers, they migrate. They tend to change the channels, the main river channels. They tend to change their positions. So we're looking for places where the ancient river system was flowing, and locate fertile or relatively good soil for agriculture to happen. No? And so when you see these desert reclamation projects, they're not randomly placed somewhere. It's because the terrain was analyzed, the conditions were analyzed, and so on. So moving further south, near Lake Nasser, there's an important area here in Komombo that has been used for agriculture, millennia, centuries, really. For many, many years, mostly close to the Nile. And in some places, the agricultural activity is expanding towards, the desert plain area away from the Nile. One of the problems is that you need water for irrigation, and the water needs to be brought to those areas that are further away from the Nile. This is done by building canals, but this is only possible if the area is flat, meaning if this area here is more or less at the same level as the Nile water, then we can, it's possible to build a canal and bring the water from the Nile to these areas. But if the topography is such, which is the case in the Western Desert, that this plain is much higher than the Nile, then you cannot bring water up, basically, to a higher level, unless you pump, and which is very expensive and not really doable. So they were interested, the local government, in understanding this Western Desert plain area and see if agricultural activities can be performed there, maybe using groundwater. Now, if we look at the history of agriculture in Egypt, and this is the recent history from 1960 to, let's say, 2010 or 2015. This graph is from 2015. We see that the type of crops that they have been cultivating has changed. No? And in recent times, they're growing more grains and citrus fruit trees and sugarcane. And you can clearly see the increase. And what that means is that these are types of crops that require more water than, for example, cotton, beans, and peas, and so on, right? Now, if we put that into context with another graph showing us the water, what we call the terrestrial water storage, and how it has changed over time. Again, this is not from the 60s. This starts in 2000, recent time, 2002 probably, to 2016. We have now a way to measure the terrestrial storage from space. It's actually a program called, a mission called GRACE. And it measures not only, it measures basically the surface water, the soil moisture, and the groundwater all together for huge areas. And we can then use that information to assess whether there are some anomalies or not in terms of the storage capacity of the earth crust and surface, right? The soil, the surface, and the groundwater, and if that changes over time. And so we did that for the Nile basin in Egypt. We divided it into Upper Nile, Middle Nile, and Lower Nile. And the graph basically shows you the anomaly. If there's no anomaly, it would be around 0, right? And there's always some fluctuation because these are due to seasonality. Some months in a year, there's more water in the soil and in the Nile River, and some months it's lower, right? But we see that around 2010, it starts decaying, it goes down, I mean, there's an important anomaly, especially in 2012. And then it somehow recovers, but it doesn't get back to how it was before. And that is due to an important drought, not necessarily in Egypt, because in Egypt is anyway, it's a desert, so it doesn't rain there. It's basically the drought that occurred in, East Africa, in Ethiopia, for example, or Kenya, or those countries where you do have important rainfall. And have an effect on the Nile because they're part of the huge Nile basin. And so you can sort of measure these, the effect of the droughts in the Upper Nile basin in Egypt. And that has consequences in terms of agriculture, right? So this picture here, just to put this in context again, is showing you this part here. We're now focusing on this part here and trying to map the type of crops and how, and the cropping pattern, how the agriculture activity is intensifying, changing, and how much water consumption or how much water these crops require, and whether that's changing over time, right? So first we take a look at the crop pattern. Different from crop type. Crop pattern means when does a specific crop type, has its peak growing season, right? So what happens is that the farmers cultivate, the land in different ways. They may plant crops that reach their peak growth season in the summer, or maybe in spring, or maybe in winter. Now, in a desert area, the timing is very important, because remember, all the crops need to be irrigated. And we know that during the summertime, the temperatures really get very hot, whereas in the wintertime, it's still hot, but less. Right? So the wintertime is usually a better time to irrigate, because less evapotranspiration will happen. And so we were kind of trying to use the Landsat time series to understand the cropping pattern. When do farmers plant what type of crops, right? And how much water do they need in order to grow? So here we have a comparison between one crop pattern year from 2013 to 14, and the other one is 15 to 16. And although it looks very similar, if we zoom in a little bit, and you can see the resolution of these images, here you have the scale, right? We do see some variations. The spring crops in dark red, they seem to be more, taking up more areas in 2015-16 than the year before, or 2 years before, and then the summer one, you see the yellow colors, they're usually closer to the Nile, because the Nile is a very reliable source of water, right? Whereas here, these maybe also are being irrigated partially by groundwater, which is dependent on the seasonality. Another product that we can generate from these images is mapping not the cropping pattern, but the type of crops, whether alfalfa, dates, maize, mango trees, sugarcane, and so on. And this is important because we can use that information to assess how much water do these different types of crops need, and how can we monitor this from space. Here we see that due to the resolution, the satellite resolution, it was easier to map maize and sugarcane, because they make up very large, areas, easy to detect. Whereas vegetables are much harder to map from space. I will show you in a minute how that was done. We used Ndvi. Ndvi is a vegetation index that can be used to measure the health of vegetation. Some of you may be aware of this. It uses 2 spectral bands, where we know that one is the red, absorbs, a healthy plant absorbs red light, but it reflects near infrared. And that creates this slope here, very steep, for healthy vegetation. When the vegetation starts to dry, decay, that slope becomes less steep and can be measured by using these 2 spectral bands. And when it's completely dead and you see basically only soil, then you get a very flat line. And this Ndvi index can be observed over time. And so it provides a value that can be used to indicate the stage of the vegetation greenness or growth stage. And that's shown here. So you've got the Ndvi index values on the y-axis, and here the month. Let's say this is showing you a 1 year example, and each point would be maybe a month or maybe 15 days. I don't know how many points they plotted here. And it basically shows you when the Ndvi is very low, there is no vegetation visible in that field. When it starts to grow and the plants, start to develop, and the chlorophyll activity becomes, visible from these observations, then you get a high Ndvi. This would be the peak of the growing season. And then when it's being harvested, or when there's when the plants are removed, it drops, right? And so by measuring Ndvi from space, we can actually detect and say, when does a field show that it's covered by crop, when is it being harvested, and so on, right? So all this information can be obtained from these Ndvi time series, also called measuring or time series of photosynthetic activity for the entire growing season. And there's another link. I hope that I can share that with you through the chat. It's very interesting to see what type of products they have. So based on that, we performed this exercise again in our area here in Komombo, near Aswan. We went to the field. We took some pictures, as you can see here. So we have here maize, sugarcane, mango trees, and this is a vegetable, a field with vegetable, zucchinis, and so on. And then we took GPS measurements, and we then found these points on the image, and we looked at the Ndvi time series using Landsat between 2015 and 2016. And each of these graphs, they basically they contain how many colors? I think 5, I don't know. And each color means that they were taken from different different places within a field, a large field, right? So you need to take many measurements. So these Ndvi values over time, they were extracted from the Landsat, and from known crop fields. So we knew that this is sugarcane, this is alfalfa, maize, and mango. And you can see the growing season, how it varies. For example, for the mangoes, these mangoes, the curve, more or less stays stable. For the sugarcane, there is a very long period when the sugarcane is basically green, and then it's harvested, so it goes down, right? And then it takes a couple of months to grow back, right? So that gives us a way of monitoring the health of the crop. And so we did that, and this is another way of showing it. So here we have a sequence of maps from they are all from the same year, 2015. They all show in green color and different green shades a vegetation index. In this case, it's the enhanced vegetation index, similar to Ndvi. And the dark green means that particular field is, covered by a dense crop canopy. It's basically it is at the peak of its growing season, right? And if it's low, it means that field is not covered by any crop. It's showing soil, so non-vegetated areas, right? So if we observe the growing season, and you can, first of all, you see the pattern here. These lines are canals. again, you know, the area needs to have, you know, you need to bring water from the Nile to these areas in the desert. And you see that the farmers do have a schedule how they farm, how they plant the crops. So in May, June, which is it's basically the start of the very hot, you know, summer. Certain fields show that they grow, that they have crops, and others are in fallow, right? As we move to July, August, we see that some fields become very green. That means a lot of irrigation is happening, right? And then in September, October, it spreads out. It's when the temperatures are not so hot, and especially in January, it's when in the desert or in that part of the world, the temperatures are less high, not so hot, and it is more feasible to do irrigation because you're not losing so much water to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. And that's when most of the fields are being irrigated in March. And then this is when they stop, right? Now, this is a way to measure the phenological activity of the crops, and we can put that in relation to the water consumption of the crops by applying a different index. It's the water index. So before we were looking at Ndvi index, now we're looking at water index. Again, all these maps were derived from Landsat, from space, from electromagnetic radiation. But we get a different picture now. Again, the same year, again, the same sequence of months, but now we're looking at another phenomenon. We're looking at evapotranspiration. How much water is required by the different crop types and fields. The higher the value, it's shown in red, basically in yellow and red. The lower, it's shown in blue, right? And so we can easily detect which crops require more water and are also evapotranspiring more water, right? And you can see the pattern and how it changes from May, June, then in the summer when it's really hot. They're not irrigating too much the fields because, you know, they want to, you know, the goal is to make this as sustainable as possible. But then they start in September, October, and definitely in the winter time, it's when the farmers irrigate most of the fields. January, that's the month, no? Because because of the temperatures, they don't need to irrigate so much as compared to the summer, right? And all this can be shown in the form of maps, a sequence of maps, or we can actually take individual pixels here and take a reading, right? Which we did here. So for each of these fields, we know what crops they have planted. We can also map that from Landsat images. So here we have in different colors the different crops, and then we can monitor over time the actual evapotranspiration that happens. So we see that some crop types are not planted in the summer. Here this is the summertime, right here, where you see that the different crop types have different water demands, right? Some are higher and some are lower. So it makes sense to plant in the summertime when temperatures are very high, when evapotranspiration is very high. Maybe plant certain crop types that are not so demanding. They don't need so much water. And then in the winter time, this is the January, January, the water demands are very close. The evapotranspiration values are very close. And then in the summer, again, they spread. Okay, so let me see what time is it. All right. This is an example of the use of remote sensing in agriculture. And so we learned how we can use these images to identify the vegetation types, the crop types, measure their aerial extent, through change detection. Also, how we can map the distribution amount and type and seasonal changes of vegetation patterns that allow us to determine the rates of evapotranspiration. And that allows us also to assess the type of irrigation system used, the amount of water consumption, and also the agriculture intensity, how intensive the area is being used for agricultural purposes. And yeah, so basically we explored the crop types and put that in relation to the water demands, because that allows then regulators or the local government to improve their water management in irrigated agriculture by implementing the necessary policies, because the government really regulates, the local government and also the national government, how much water these farmers can actually use from the Nile River or from the ground, right? It's regulated. Okay, so yeah, so this was an example from Egypt, but I hope it gave you an understanding of how we convert the signal received from the measured by the instrument on a space platform, how we convert that signal into a product, into a data product that we can use for an application. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Magali, for your presentation. Now the next session is Q&A session and conclusion session that will be conducted by Professor Dr. Hermin Pancasakti Kusumaningrum. Professor Dr. Hermin Pancasakti, time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anissa Fadila. Okay, Prof. Magali, thank you so much for a very interesting and valuable presentation. And before we enter the question and answer session, I would like to convey the best regard from our dean of the Faculty of Science and Mathematics Sciences, Prof. Widowati, and she apologized that for not being able to welcome Prof. Magali in person, yes, because there is another event in the same time.
Okay. Not a problem.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much. And now we come to the stage of a question and answer, and I will open the 2 terms, and each term consists of 3 questions. And the first terms, if anyone or students want to ask a question directly to Prof. Magali, or maybe you can type in the chat, and I will read it to you. Okay. Any question?
Or maybe comments?
Oh, okay.
Okay, good.
There's a lot of students want to ask you, Prof. Magali. Okay, the first question come from Dinda Khairunisa.
Okay, good. Good afternoon, Prof. Magali, back in Indonesia, and good morning, I guess, in England.
In Boston, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity, but I'm very sorry that I cannot open my camera due to certain circumstances.
Not a problem. I understand. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm actually wanted to explore some stuff related to remote sensing. I wanted to ask, how accurate is it to detect air quality compared to using devices such as air pollution measurement devices on the surface?
Yeah. So, well, I mentioned in one of the first slides that these satellite observations need to be calibrated and they need to be validated with in situ measurements. No, so we know how they compare to these in situ measurements, and of course the first of all, the amount of information that you can get from in situ measurements is, not comparable with space measurements. First of all, because you have a much better control of what you're measuring, right? I mean, you just imagine these satellites. I mean, once you build the instrument and you launch the instrument to space, there's no one there to actually, maybe change some or exchange maybe the instrument by another instrument, right? Which is now different, or it's now possible with the International Space, what is it called? Station. So the International Space Station is precisely an effort to kind of combine what's possible on the Earth's surface, with these in situ measurements to target certain measurements, to use several different instruments and so on. They're trying to replicate that in that space station because they have astronauts, right? The astronauts are there to, control everything, right? The experiments, and it's right. So this actually tells you that these satellite images, whether it's for the atmosphere or any other component of the Earth, they are never going to be as detailed as, and also the variety of observation is never going to be comparable to ground stations. So in situ measurements. There's no, it's a different scale. They're also logistically, you cannot compare both, right? But the power of satellite observation lies not necessarily in very precise measurements, but the power lies in, or the advantage of space observation is, first of all, it's global. It's done in a very systematic manner. They're using the same instrument repeatedly. And with new missions, they're making the new device, the new instrument, compatible with the old as much as possible, so that there's a continuity. Same instrument or similar instrument over time, over the entire area, globe, in a very systematic, repetitive manner. And this is something that is an advantage over in situ measurements because of logistical reasons. Now, the space, what is it? The International Space Station is something between in situ and these space satellites, but it's a station that is it's being serviced by astronauts, and they receive regularly new sensors, and they have to put them, actually, they install them, right? It's like an in situ measurement, but in space. In situ measurement station in space. They receive these instruments, a rocket, they launch a rocket, and then the new instrument comes, and new astronauts, and they have to, and this is why these instruments on that in that station are called experimental instruments, because they, I think we have now the technology to improve the measurements, and that's currently done in that space station, But yes. So different instruments, different logistical challenges. They have advantages and disadvantages, but both are needed. Yeah. So again, and also I wanted to add to the atmosphere, although I'm not an atmosphere, scientist, but the other advantage of observing the atmosphere from above the atmosphere is that you get a measurement of the entire atmospheric column. Whereas if you placed an instrument on the ground, you can only measure the first couple of meters, or maybe, if you place it on a drone or a balloon or something, maybe the first kilometer, or if it's airborne, maybe, I mean, you don't get the whole profile. The atmosphere, I think the thickness is like 10 kilometers. No? So that, and yeah, that would be an advantage in terms of using space observation. They're looking down at the atmosphere, the whole column. The challenge there is to know the structure of the atmosphere. No, so you have ground measurements, and you have then an instrument above that captures the entire, in averages throughout the entire column, atmospheric column.
Okay, so to sum up, there always going to be a pro-cons, right?
Yeah.
In each of the instruments.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's I think the approach is to use both.
True. Like combination of both, right?
Yes, and also you're talking about the in situ measurement, but if you look at the Earth, how many ground stations do we have, and what's the density of ground stations? Where are they located? You will see large, actually 2/3 of the Earth probably doesn't have ground stations, or not a lot. They have, but not a lot. Those are the oceans, because it's much harder to have a dense network of ground stations over sea than over land. And if you go to high mountain areas, huge, really high mountains, there the ground measurements become less. Why? Because the terrain is a challenge. You don't find many ground stations in the Himalaya mountain range, right? But you will find a lot more in flat areas, that are easy to access.
Okay, noted. Thank you so much, Prof. Magali.
Okay. And then the second question from Muhammad Imam.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. Before I express my question, I would like to say thanks for your previous explanation, Prof. Okay. Geospatial and remote sensing can be applied in various fields, and our study program in Diponegoro University is biotechnology. Can you explain about application of geospatial and remote sensing technology in the field of biotechnology, which is our program study, so that we can do further studies for the application? Thank you.
Yes. Can you tell me one application that you're interested in biotechnology? Can you tell me a little bit what your interest is?
I think it's like the disease spread on the many area, like virus or bacteria or something else like that.
Yes, very good. Yeah. So, for example, disease, infectious diseases. Of course, these remote sensing data sets, they will not show you or they will not really tell you where these viruses are mostly where they are and how they spread directly, right? But because actually it's it's a different scale, it's a different technique you need. I mean, you need a lab probably. I mean, I'm not a biologist, but a molecular biologist, but I can imagine that you go out and you capture these the vectors, and then you analyze the vectors in the lab, and so it's a completely different approach, right? But when you talk, that's why I was asking you for your application. I mean, what are you interested in? Because we need to find the connection between the virus, the disease, and the environment. So does the vector that carries that virus, does it appear anywhere, anytime, and so on? Or is the vector somehow conditioned to the environmental composition or condition, right? So does it appear at certain places more often than in others? And what are the factors, the environmental factors? Is it temperature? Is it water? What is it, right? And once we know those environmental parameters, then we can go and see which satellite data images may provide information about changes to these environmental variables. Let's say temperature. I know from also working with colleagues in molecular biologists that have been mapping the spread of malaria, dengue in Brazil, that they have been going to those basically tropical, forested environments and also wetlands, and have placed their traps, right, and captured the virus and so on through, capturing the vectors. And they approached us from the remote sensing community to provide them additional information about the landscape, because these are areas in Brazil that are being converted to agriculture, and some of them illegally, right? And so they're changing the landscape, and by basically removing the trees, the closed canopy, removing it, what happens is that the temperature is increasing, the water, evapotranspiration is increasing, and that's changing the ecosystem. So indirectly, you can use remote sensing to kind of assess the factors influencing the habitat of these vectors. And one other component is human beings. So the spread of disease depends on the host, right? So you have, for example, in the example of Brazil, an area, basically a pristine area that where a wetland, it's a Pantanal, it's the Pantanal wetland area in Brazil, where usually no one should be there. No human being, right? And until recently, it was very difficult to penetrate that wetland. But now they're building these roads. They're basically, people are going there because they're mining, because they're whatever they're doing. These workers are then infected, and they carry that disease back home to their towns, right? So basically, indirectly, you can use satellite remote sensing not to map the movement of people, not necessarily, but you can measure and see how basically human beings are providing access to these very remote areas by building roads and so on. And indirectly, you can assess the presence of people, and how that disease then travels to other areas. So it's how can I say, you have heard the word proxy, right? So you're using image-derived environmental parameters as proxy to understand habitat fragmentation or destruction, to understand human migration, not because you see the vehicles or the people, but you see the infrastructure and how it's expanding. You see the activity, human activity, right? And so indirectly you can use remote sensing for that purpose. Good question. So far, I'm getting very good questions. Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you, Muhammad Imam. And then the third question, Ken William, it's your turn.
Yes. Good morning, Professor Megaliko. Firstly, I want to say thank you very much for the time and place that has been given. Before I continue to my question, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ken William Sutanto. You can call me Ken. And I am currently applied in biotechnology major in Diponegoro University 2022. So first of all, you previously said that the applications of geospatial and remote sensing technology that have been designed and assisted by this particular satellite can detect characteristics of planet Earth and can also detect environmental conditions of the planet. The question I want to ask is, I'm actually curious, can this working principle be used on other planets in our solar system, such as Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and others, so that we can know the characteristics and contents of these planets? And if not, can you please explain the reasons why it won't work in the planets that I mentioned before, other than Earth? Thank you.
Good, very good. Actually, in astronomy, remote sensing has been used since the early times of astronomy, when they developed a telescope. So that was the first remote sensing instrument, if you want. And they were observing, you know, the sky and so on. Because basically what you are capturing through these telescope is light. In this case, in the early times, it was visible light, right? Reflected by these planets, and the light was basically coming from the sun, shining over the moon or shining over the Mars or Venus or whatever planet, and then they would with the telescope capture this very, very weak signal. Not the moon, because the moon is quite close to the Earth, but Venus and all that. And yeah, so eventually they astronomers they realized, well, you know, visible light is a limitation, so you know, we need to construct instruments that can see beyond visible light. And so that's when they started using instruments that allowed them to capture you know, the whole spectrum of non-visible light. And in planets, you know, all we know about Mars, well, now we have also launched some space vehicles to Mars, right? But you know, those vehicles, space vehicles, they use more or less the same sensors we are using for Earth observation. They're taking spectral readings of, you know, of the Mars surface. And so, yes, remote sensing has been used by astronomers since ever they invented that, those instruments or detectors. And they also use it to analyze the composition of the atmosphere, for example, Venus or Mars or other planets that have an atmosphere. No, that's why we know the gas composition without having, you know, been able to take a sample and bring it back to Earth, right? It's all based on remote sensing. So planetary observation is so dependent on remote sensing. No? And some of these instruments we use for Earth observation were probably first meant to observe other planets and then used for Earth observation. I'm talking about hyperspectral sensors. No? Those are sensors that take spectral measurements in many, many consecutive bands, like hundreds of bands, to get the spectral profile of, for example, of the atmosphere in Venus or Mars and so on. Yeah. all these satellites, that we have launched to observe other planets, they have remotes that are equipped with remote sensing sensors, and then we have these huge telescopes, that allow us to measure and to see beyond our galaxy, and those also use remote sensing instruments. So yeah.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Professor.
okay, thank you. And now we entering the second term. Want to ask? We have Prof. Senuri. Okay, Prof. Senuri.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof.
You made the first one.
Good morning, Prof. Magali.
Good morning.
It has been a long time, that
Yes,
we
long time, yeah. From
last time it's in September, right, with your student?
yes, in August. I think.
No. Okay, Prof. Magali, I already sent 2 slides of our result conducted in our research project in Pekalongan. The first one is the quantity of the bacteria that we found. I'm working together with Prof. Hermin and some of their students. So you can see that in the lagoon, we have a quantity of bacteria.
Yes.
That related to well, we know that the number of the quantity of the bacteria is related to the organic matter. And in times we try to make an overlay related to the nitrate and phosphate. Okay. This is the one that Prof. Hermin and me and also Pak Helmi, we will prepare for our next publication related to how we can show the dynamic of the environment and what is the stimulator to rise the number of the bacteria, in order to know that is there any possibility for us to make some mitigation or some forecast related to the environment condition. And the second one is just to make an underline for the question of Mas Imam Muzaki, that yes, we already have worked with the bacteria. We already work with the several parameters related to the ocean. And we found that for us, a researcher, we have so much benefit that we could provide and we could explore more based on the 2 concepts. First one is the radiation, and the second one is related to the electromagnet. Okay.
Yes.
For the radiation, this is the one that I do hope in the future that we still can work together, is how we can use that one to forecast the quantity of the methane that provided by the bacteria during the degradation of the organic matter and through it or saturated to the atmosphere. So by measuring that one, we believe that we will know that how much the quantity of the global warming caused by the activity of the degradation of organic matter. The second one is that we believe that in the coastal area, that in Indonesia in general, using by the industrial and some anthropogenic activity, in Indonesia we call it UMKM, that it's small scale industry based on house activity, something like that. Okay, and part of that we already discussed is batik. Okay, you know that part of batik provide waste. That part of them is organic matter, but the other is some metal, something like that. The newest issue is related to the microplastic. Okay.
Yeah.
And for me now is I did a recent information related to the microplastic. How we can ensure that one or the distribution based on the electromagnetic wave, because we know that the plastic is the something artificial that might be reflect some of this well, the wave that came from the solar or the one that came from the radiation.
Yes.
So I don't know. I do hope you have some information related to that one, and which satellite that we can use for that one. And we do hope based on that information we can provide some perspective to the forecasting the pollution in coastal area. Thank you, Ramagali.
Yeah, well, thank you, because yeah, it's true. You know, during the summer, the short program that I was running this last summer, you know, our students were interested in all these topics. You know, pollution, water pollution, plastic, and so on, and they, but you know, the time they had was very limited, no? But the fact that you have these measurements, in situ measurements, and you have actually access, more easy access to those sites, is very important for us in terms of using that information, in situ information, and see which satellite data or image type can be used to detect these changes. No, and you know that we have now also more and more access to better, higher resolution satellite images. For example, Planet. Some of you have heard about the Planet. It's a company that has a fleet of nano satellites, and they're taking measurements, you know, repeatedly, and we have access to some of these data. But you know, Professor Sanuri, what we need to do, because I realized that for students, when they get assigned to a project only for 6 weeks, it's too short, right? For them really to develop something. And I've been actually talking to some people at the, you know, PU has a new Institute of Global Sustainability. And this is a huge institute, and it's they have you know, collaborators and researchers and professors from many different departments. And I've been kind of talking to them and see if there's a way to have a collaboration or a program that can fund, at least on our side, some students, not only for 6 weeks, but maybe for a whole semester, you know, or longer, because the students need to learn, and there's always a learning curve, right? And by the time they finally learned about the specific environmental problem affecting the Pekalongan, the batik industry, and all that, then they finish their program, right? So I want to take this opportunity and actually continue our conversation and see how we can join forces. On my side, I need to secure funding for a student for at least 1 semester, if not 2 semesters, to get them started and look at these imageries and see, you know, based on your GIS information and in situ information, what is possible to do with these images, right? So we should somehow, do some brainstorming.
Ramagali, we would like also provide our student from the study program of biotechnology, working together with our student from oceanography and also from marine science, that we might join your student and working together. I don't know, we do the same things in Indonesia. I do hope that next year, me and Prof. Hermin, we can get some funding to the world-class professor that can be bring our student working together with us and try to make some international publication. So like this one, we have the result, and I believe Prof. Hermin, they have, I don't know, how much, Prof. Hermin? 10 to 12 students that are working in this Pekalongan area, right?
Yes, yes, I think so.
Wow.
Some of the students also attending this event, I think.
So you see, Prof. Magali, I hope that the student from the study program of biotechnology can provide the data and what they try to make which shots of the image that they can use and make it related to the result in situ.
Yes. Yeah, we need to find a mechanism to have make it possible for your students and our students to collaborate throughout the whole semester, you know, not just a couple of weeks. Because
maybe if your student can come to Indonesia, Prof. Magali.
Yes. Yeah, this is another
we
thing.
Will be very happy. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking actually for maybe a student doing a master, and you know, and this would be part of the master thesis. And then that student can go to Indonesia and spend maybe the summertime there. And I think that's a more effective way, you know? And so I will talk also to Professor Gopal, Suchi Gopal. She's also interested. And we will see if we can find a mechanism to fund our student here in BU. And I think it's possible through this new initiative that the university, Boston University, is making with the Institute of Global Sustainability. And once we have a student, then assign that student or put that student in contact with your students, right? And with you, yeah. But we need to find a mechanism to make this happen. And it's not, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think we will arrange that one, and we will support our students to communicate with you. And we do hope that we can, with our data that we already collected, we might have the possibility to construct a new publication. Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Very interesting discussion. Yes, Prof. Magali. And I want to, if you do not mind, maybe can we have one question anymore? The last question?
Yes, please.
Student, is there any question from you all? Oh, okay. The last question, yes, from Felicia.
Good morning, Professor. Here I want to ask about, I read some article or journal about that GIS is actually could like a control about oil spills and how that possible. Well, in Indonesia, there's a lot of cases that actually oil spills cannot being like oil spills in Indonesia is still being the case that we can prevent like that. Thank you.
Oil spills in where, over land or water, ocean?
Especially in ocean.
Yeah. Well, oil spills can be relatively easily detected by radar images, because the oil film changes the surface properties of the water, no? And that is detectable by these SAR. They are called SAR images. The problem is that these images, radar images, are not very easy to use, no? because they require specific software, processing software. But now I think more and more people are learning how to use SAR. So detecting, I think, oil spills is not so complicated, but preventing them, I guess, is, you also want to know the source of why did that spill happen, no? So I'm not sure how, I know that, yes, Professor Helmi was looking into using SAR radar, and he might know a little bit more about that. But yeah, mapping and detecting the oil spills is done nowadays routinely. The spatial resolution is still a little bit of a problem. So it's easier to map and detect large oil spills than smaller ones. But yes, so radar would be the type of sensor or image we would use. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Professor. GIS it actually still can prevent some oil spills. Or
how to prevent them, right?
yes, actually yes, because there's a lot
Yeah.
in Indonesia. Actually, there's a lot of oil spills cases here, but we still need to prevent that. So maybe I thought that with GIS, maybe we can prevent oil spills especially in ocean water.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do these oil spills occur due to accidents, or to the way they are extracting the oil, or what is it, human failure, or what type of failure? So that's the first question. So are you talking about the accidents or ships that maybe for some reason are leaking oil? Or what is it? Because oil spills can occur due to many causes. So I'm not sure what you're interested in knowing.
Especially in human failure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, then again, I mean, in that case, I think it's you probably would not use remote sensing. I mean, remote sensing is being used to observe or monitor. Oftentimes it gives you some indications of how to prevent it, but if the failure is due to mismanagement or handling basically the extraction of oil, then remote sensing can do very little. It's more a policy issue, implementing the right protective policies. And of course, with GIS, you can do some analysis, geospatial analysis, and you can, for example, detect where these oil spills happen more often and so on, and then provide information to the decision makers. But it's really the task of the local government and implementing their policies and checking that that the industry is following the regulations. So remote sensing is good to observe if people are doing what they're supposed to do, right? But to prevent that, you really need government. You need regulations.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Okay, Felicia. Okay, I think that was the last question, and right now I want to wrap up the of the material that the geospatial and remote sensing is very important and have a close relationship with biotechnology application, not only in environment but also in the industry and also in the to overcome the disease that recently happened in this year. Okay, right, Prof. Magali?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'm so glad
And
that we can travel again.
yes, yes. Yes, this is also the first time that we conducted the course offline with all of the students, and we are happy to have our student in our class right now. Yes. And now can we have a photograph with Prof. Magali of the student? Please open your camera.
This way I get to see the students' faces. Wow.
Yes.
Mm.
Okay,
Well, it's nice.
students.
Yeah, nice to have such a large audience.
Yes. This is the class of 2022, the new students, yes, in
Wow.
biotechnology study program. We have almost the 400 students in our
Wow.
study
Yeah.
program, Prof. Magali, yes.
Large group.
And
Yeah.
yes, yes, and the Faculty of Science and Mathematics, we have almost 6,000, yes, 6,000 students. A lot
Wow.
of students in our faculty. Yes. Okay, student, have you already opened your camera?
So this year you
And
conducted it online, but will you conduct it in person next year, or what are the plans?
if you want to come to Indonesia, I will have a special venue for you, Prof.
Okay.
Magali. Maybe we
Yeah.
can
Hopefully
get
next
some
year.
sample
Yeah.
together.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Maybe we can go to Pekalongan together
That would be
and
nice.
take
Yes, we should.
some sample. Yes.
Yes. So hopefully next year the situation is going to be easier with COVID.
Yes. We hope also like that. I'm sorry. And now, students, Mr. Pak Indra.
Excuse me, Prof. Edmin. Maybe Balala can help and handle it. Balala, please.
Miss Anissa Fadila, Balala, please help us with the photograph.
I think we have 3 screens, right, Mbak Anissa? Total
Yes.
3%. Okay.
Okay. For the attendance, please open up your camera because I will take the picture of our session this today. Okay, for the first screen. Okay, let me take a picture. Please give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, wait. I will save it first. And then the second screen. Please open up your camera and give your best smile to us. 1, 2, 3. And the last screen. Okay, the last screen, there is nobody open the camera. Okay. Okay. All of the screen is already saved, Prof. Hermin.
Okay, thank
You
you
may
so
continue.
much, Ms. Anissa Fadila. And before we close this event, we have a certificate for Prof. Magali. Mr. Indra Gunawan, please show the certificate for Prof. Magali. Please help me. Pak Indra.
Belum kelihatan Pak Indra. Ups, keluar Mas Indra.
Maybe it's still loading, sir.
Yes.
Okay, now I see it. Okay, thank you very much. Oh,
Yes.
excellent.
Prof. Magali,
Well,
yes, this is the
yes, very nice.
the certificate for you. Thank you for joining us today. And also I want to thank all of the participants in here. Thank you so much. And I hope this will broaden our understanding about remote sensing and also the importance of remote sensing is. Thank you so much for all. I send the time to Mbak Anissa Fadila, and I want all of the participants to give big applause to Prof. Magali.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you also for, for your interest in remote sensing, and your questions tell me that you're really, you're really looking for ways to implement or use it in your own discipline. So hopefully, yes, hopefully next year I can travel to Indonesia, and we definitely, Professor Sainuri and Hermin, we should find the mechanisms to make this collaboration more effective, right? So let's communicate, offline and see what we can do. So I hope to visit Indonesia soon. So my last visit was in 2019. So I hope next year it's going to be possible.
So we are waiting for you. And we will
yes, I'm also waiting.
We'll be glad to have you, Prof. Magali.
Yeah.
And Semarang.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay. Thank you so much. And by the time I want to close this event and hope that we will meet again, Prof. Magali, by online and also by offline next years. Thank you so much. Take care.
Very good.
Of you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Prof.
Bye, Prof. Magali. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Prof.